Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. As bad as the coronavirus is at the present time, and it is bad, let's make no excuses, not trying to mitigate anything whatsoever, and yet we continue to hear some really, really positive things, some glimmers of hope, that proverbial silver lining of the dark cloud. So let me encourage you once again, be constant in prayer, look to the Lord, be calm in spirit, trust in the Lord that no matter what happens, nothing can separate us from the love of God. What happens in the external world can never destroy the inheritance that is ours. That is such a comforting, marvelous, and wonderful reality. Okay. We're looking at Lance Conley's book, Hope Resurrected. His fundamental argument that he carries throughout the entirety of the book is that preterism cannot be true, because if the Lord came in AD 70, if that was the second coming, then election, and by that he means the preaching of the gospel, and when a person accepts the gospel, he is elected. And therefore, according to Conley, at the coming of the Lord, there's no more preaching of the gospel, no more evangelism, because there's no more sin. Now, I want to encourage you to go back and view the previous 3 videos that I did on Isaiah chapter 65. Because Isaiah chapter 65 absolutely falsifies Mr. Conley's entire deal. Now, Mr. Conley told us he was going to produce some material on Isaiah 65, and his claim is that part of it is fulfilled, part of it is unfulfilled. Well, what part of it is unfulfilled? According to Mr. Conley, it's the new heaven and new earth. But wait a minute, as I proved to you in those videos, that new heaven and new earth would come when, and only when, Old Covenant Israel was destroyed. Now that means, as we will see in Isaiah chapter 66, that means that if the new heaven and the new earth has not come, that Old Covenant Israel remains God's covenant people. It's not the church as the new Israel. This is Old Covenant Israel destroyed at the coming of the Lord to bring in the new heaven and new earth. Now, Isaiah 66 is in many, many ways a reiteration of Isaiah chapter 65. And while I could spend a tremendous amount of time on Isaiah chapter 66, I'm going to hit some highlights. Verses 1 through 2. The Lord said, "Heaven is my throne, earth is my footstool. Where is the house that you shall build for me? Have my hands not created all of these things? By my word did all these things not come into existence? But to this will I look, to the man that is poor of spirit, contrite in heart, and that who trembles at my word. Here is Yahweh." And by the way, let's keep in mind that at the time that this was written, the Jerusalem temple had been destroyed. Isaiah 63, the last 3 verses. And the Lord is predicting a time in which his presence would not be, quote, confined, I hate that word, would not be confined to a physical temple. Do you remember that Stephen, in Acts chapter 7:49, standing in the Jerusalem Herodian temple, that magnificent, unbelievable edifice, said, "God does not dwell in temples made with hands," and he quoted Isaiah 66, 1 and 2 verbatim. You know what that tells us? That tells us that Stephen, and obviously that means the apostles, believed that Isaiah 66 was being fulfilled in their day and in their time. Now watch this. The Lord said, in that period of time in which he would no longer dwell in temples made with hands, it shall be that it shall be that one who kills a bull shall be like a man who kills a man. The one who sacrifices a lamb as if he breaks a dog's neck. In other words, animal sacrifices would be an abomination. Listen, folks, William Bell, on our regular Tuesday night program that is called Two Guys in a Bible, and it's on www.fulfilledradio.com. William and I have been discussing Isaiah 66 for a couple of months now. All of the programs are archived. Let me encourage you to go there and to listen to those programs, because what God is saying here is absolutely incredible. The time was coming in the future. He's not talking about the Solomonic temple. He's talking about, obviously, the Herodian temple, in which the sacrifices of that temple would be an abomination. Well, there's a whole lot we could say there about the Zadokite priesthood no longer existing in any kind of a confirmed form, etc., but I won't take the time to do that. But verse 4, I will choose their delusions and bring their fears on them, because when I called, no one answered. When I spoke, they did not hear. But they did evil before my eyes and chose that in which I did not delight. Now look, this is directly from Isaiah 65. Isaiah 65, 1 and 2, Isaiah 65, 15, you are those who forget my holy mountain. In other words, they were abusing the temple in the time period being forecast. And remember, once again, Paul in Romans 10, 20 and 21 quoted Isaiah 65, 1 and 2. In other words, he quoted Isaiah 66 to speak of Israel of his day refusing the gospel. Oh, by the way, this is taken directly from Deuteronomy chapter 32. Isaiah 65 and Isaiah 66 are dealing with Israel's last days. The days in which God would call to them and they would not answer, that once again Paul applied to his day, that Hebrews applied to the first century generation, Hebrews 10, 32 and following. This is absolutely incredible. Now, what did God say? Because they refused my call, I will bring their fears upon them. You see, you've got to understand something here. Throughout the Tanakh, every single time when the Lord said He called, but Israel did not answer, judgment was imminent. It wasn't 2,000 years away. And thus when Paul, in Romans 10 through 11, spoke of Israel refusing to obey the gospel call, Paul was very powerfully predicting imminent judgment on Old Covenant Israel for refusing to hear the gospel. And by the way, I've just got to take note of this. In verse 6, the Lord said, the sound of noise from the city, a voice from the temple, the voice of the Lord, who fully repays His enemies. Well, once again, and by the way, William and I talked about this on our program on Tuesday night. William observed that this language here of fully recompensing his enemies is taken directly from Deuteronomy 32, 32 to 43. Amen. But guess what? There's more here. The sound of noise from the city, a voice from the temple, a voice of the Lord. Josephus, in Wars, book 6, I think it's book 6, records for us that in the year 66, the outbreak of the war, as the priest went to minister in the temple, an incredible light shined up and lit up the entire temple, and a sound of a tumult of an army and chariots in the heavens was heard, and a voice sounded in the temple, "Let us depart hence." Oh, by the way, Tacitus, the Roman historian, recorded the same thing. Now, I don't know if Tacitus was reliant upon Josephus. I don't have any indication that he was. It's an interesting question, but I don't know. All I do know is that he recorded the same event. So here we have in Isaiah 66 a prediction that as a result of Israel's refusal to hear the call of the Lord, as foretold in Deuteronomy 32, a prediction of their last days, the Lord would bring judgment on them and fully repay his enemies in Israel's last days. And Paul, in Romans 10, quotes Isaiah 65 and 66 about Israel's refusal to hear the gospel call, the word of the Lord to them, which means judgment on Israel, judgment on Jerusalem, judgment on the temple. A voice, a sound of noise from the city, a voice from the temple, the voice of the Lord was coming on Israel. We thus have a very clear-cut prediction of the coming future Isaiah to be in Paul's day, because he's applying Isaiah 66 to his day, to his generation, to Israel, rebellious Israel of his day. We thus have a very clear-cut prediction of the coming destruction of Jerusalem. Okay, well, I'm out of time for today, so we'll have to pick this up next Friday. But in the meantime, your homework is to read the entirety of Isaiah 66. See if you can find a reference to the coming of the Lord. See if you can find a reference to preaching after the day of the Lord. If you read it carefully, you'll find it with ease, because it's there, it's undeniable, and it's powerful. It is also fatal to Mr. Conley's book. Hey, thanks so much for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. I do appreciate you being with me, and by the way, thank you so much for all of you who have sent me private messages as well as posting on my YouTube and in response to the Facebook viewings as well. Yes, we're living in difficult times, but please let me encourage you once again. Be constant in prayer. Be faithful to the Lord. Look to Him, realizing that nothing can separate us from the love of God. God bless. I'll see you on Monday.